to go into more about the Lebanon front, we are very lucky to be joined by Elijah Magnier, veteran war correspondent and an analyst, friend of the show, friend of Rania. So welcome to the show, Elijah.
Hello, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So Elijah, I'd like to start with you. It's always so good to see you. Yesterday was a horrific day, as I know that you saw because you wrote about it. And I want to start before we get to Lebanon. I want to start with Iran because you argue in a recent piece that you wrote. It's called "A Ceasefire in Name Only: How Trump and Netanyahu Left Lebanon Outside the Deal." You argue that really isn't a ceasefire, but it's a selective pause that's designed around U.S. and Israeli priorities, which I think it's surprising to hear it that way, and then it questions why Iran would agree to it. But I think you're right to say are designed around U.S. and Israeli priorities. So can you explain what that actually means? Who's getting protection and who's deliberately left exposed here?
Well, actually, who is protected is Benjamin Netanyahu. What happened is we have seen the Financial Times and the New York Times today saying the tweet on social media by Prime Minister of Pakistan, Sharif, was coordinated with the White House word by word. Therefore, it was agreed that Lebanon will be part of the ceasefire. Now, what happened is when the ceasefire was announced, including Lebanon, Benjamin Netanyahu was harshly attacked by his supporter and the opposition group, Yair Lapid, who said Israel has lost the war on all fronts, did not achieve any objective. The army did its job. The civilians bear the consequences and stayed for 40 days in the shelter, no businesses, and then you make a deal and nothing has been achieved in Iran but the destruction and no regime change as you have advertised for. The Iranians are still firing missiles at us. Lebanon seems stronger than ever, and even Hamas is still there. What have you achieved? So what happened is that Benjamin Netanyahu turned against Lebanon, said Lebanon is not included, and start bombing the hell out of the country in 10 minutes, caused over 120 to 140 people killed and 800 wounded in just 10 minutes. Then 6 hours later, we have seen Donald Trump and the White House waking up just several hours later and saying, well, actually, Lebanon is not included. And then Iran said, well, no, actually it is. And Pakistan said, yes, it is. You said it is included, and now you're saying no. So Vice President Vance came out in the evening from Bulgaria, where he is, from Hungary, where he is to support Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and said, well, there was a misunderstanding in the English language, and we meant the ally of the United States and not the allies of Iran. So we're talking about Israel and the Gulf country, which is really ridiculous because it's making fun of Pakistan, of Iran, and of all of us. Now, the way he said it is just to try and save Benjamin Netanyahu, because again, the whole war is about the personality and the future of the Israeli prime minister. Iran said, okay, well, if this is how you want it, then we are closing down the Strait of Hormuz, where you feel the most pain, and then for the whole world to understand that Benjamin Netanyahu is responsible for the world crisis economy. And this is where things turned very badly because what happened is that the Americans said, well, okay, now we take note of the Iranians, the 3,200 ships that are stuck inside the Strait of Hormuz, 400 still outside, and the oil is rising to over $100 a barrel. Now, the Americans were caught, and who saved them and saved the Israelis? The Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun. And the way he saved them is by saying, well, I don't accept that Iran negotiate on Lebanon's behalf, and I am going to talk to the Israelis directly, and I don't need to include the Shia in the meeting because they refuse to go. So those who are going to meet the Israelis are not those who reject Israel occupation of Lebanon, who will continue fighting against Israel, and who have a problem with the Israeli occupying their land because they are the Shia of the south of Lebanon. So the President saved America by saying, okay, well, now the Lebanese are happy to meet with the Israeli directly, which they are not, only part of them. The Druze did not accept because Walid Jumblat, the Druze leader, understand that without the Shia, nothing can happen because they are the main concern. Hezbollah proved to be much stronger than the Lebanese army, who withdrew from every single position before the arrival of the Israeli army. Wherever the Israelis warned of bombing a location where the Lebanese army is, the Lebanese army withdrew following the orders of the president. And now the president wants to make sure that he exclude Iran, exclude Hezbollah, just speak in the name of those who appointed him, the Americans and the Gulf countries, and go to talk to the Israelis when those people concerned reject it and will reject any direct dialogue with the Israelis, with a person who is the president, who told us with his own words that he spent 3 days contacting the Israelis through the mechanism committee, where there are the French, the Americans, the United Nations, Lebanon, and Israel, only to repair a water conduit between a village in the south of Lebanon, and the Israeli rejected his call. So now he considers that he can achieve the withdrawal of the Israeli army from all the south of Lebanon by going to talk under fire with the Israelis, excluding the resistance that is still fighting, and the whole society that represent more than 30% of the Lebanese, when he, as a Maronite Christian, represent between 19 to 22% of Lebanon, but voted and selected by the Americans and the Gulf countries, who were, according to the US Chief of Staff yesterday, General Kane, who said he thanks all the Arabs for participating to the war, protecting the US personnel and bases, and offering the entire support to the Americans in the war against Iran.
It's so sad and embarrassing and outrageous, especially, considering we were talking earlier about how now the Israelis are trying to talk about direct negotiations with the Lebanese that are scheduled for next week in DC, between that segment of Lebanon that you were just talking about, represented by the US ambassador to DC, or sorry, the Lebanese ambassador to DC. And to do that under fire after what happened yesterday is so disgusting, because yesterday was just pure terror. The Israelis had nothing to militarily gain. They were just terrorizing everything across Lebanon, terrorizing the center of Beirut. And I want to ask you, with these conflicting narratives, I kind of want to broaden out for a moment and get your take on this, because you understand Iran very well, Elijah. You've done so much reporting on Iran. You know how the system works. You have the Pakistanis saying that Lebanon was included, the US and Israel saying it wasn't. We know the US and Israel are lying. But I'm just curious, what does that tell us about how this deal was negotiated and presented to different parties? But more specifically, I guess what I want to ask you here is about the role of Pakistan in nudging Iran to accept this deal, and about the role of China, because you just described how this deal serves Benjamin Netanyahu. So why would Iran agree to it?
Well, first of all, it was a proposal by the Chinese, who came forward and spoke to the Iranians, because Iran has zero trust in the Americans and their allies. Pakistan in one of the American allies. However, it was on the radars of the Israelis, who said on the February 22nd, during the visit of Prime Minister Modi of India, that his enemies are the Shia in the Middle East, and later on the Sunni, who are mainly moderate, and he meant Turkey, Qatar, and Pakistan. So this alliance between Israel and India disturbs the Pakistani. Therefore, they're not really on the side of Israel, but they are indeed the closest allies of the Americans. Second, China is a superpower and counts much more, certainly much more, because I don't want to offend China, but I don't want to compare it to the Americans, because the word of China counts, and we saw at the United Nations is really intervening. But the United States attacked and bombed Iran twice during the negotiations. Therefore, their word doesn't count. In this case, the place that looked like it is in Asia, done by the people living in Asia, and the negotiation is happening in Asia, is significant for the Iranians to say, well, people of the region can look after themselves without a foreign intervention. It's a message to the Gulf country to say, the Americans were not able to protect you, failed to protect themselves. They were part of the problem, not the solution. Their bases are destroyed or decimated or severely hit, according to the New York Times satellite image. Therefore, let us sort out our security among ourselves. This is a proposal of Jawad Zarif when he was a foreign minister a very long time ago. And people of the region rejected this offer. Now it is returning on the table in a different form when the Americans showed that they are unable to defend themselves, called for NATO for help, called for the United Nations to do something about it, called for Europe to support them, and yet they are, well, they claim to be the strongest army in the world, fighting alongside the strongest army in the Middle East. And they both failed to force the one of the weakest that lived for 47 years under sanctions. Everything is Iran made of missiles and everything. They failed to force it to surrender. Therefore, it is time to look at the Americans completely differently, that they can actually do exactly what Israel is doing: bomb, destroy, and achieve nothing.
Mm.
Yeah, I want to also ask you here about the Iranian response so far. I mean, so far they have basically repeatedly issued through the Iranian Speaker of Parliament, through the Iranian Foreign Minister. They've issued these statements saying Lebanon is a part of the ceasefire, and unless the Israelis stand down and stop their massacres, these negotiations are unrealistic. Now, the Israelis have, I would say, and I don't want to speak too soon, they've still committed many massacres in Lebanon. But if yesterday is now the new bar, it's certainly less intense today than it was yesterday. And we'll see how long that lower, I don't even know if it's right to call that lower intensity, but I think you know what I'm getting at here, Elijah. It seems like this meeting is still happening this weekend. Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz in response to the ceasefire against Lebanon being broken by the Israelis in such a dramatic way. But if Iran goes forward with these negotiations while Lebanon is still under this kind of fire, doesn't it weaken Iran? I guess what I really want to ask you here, Elijah, is do you see Iran, what do you think Iran will do here? How do you see Iran playing this out? Is Iran going to actually, stand by its word and back out of these negotiations if the massacres in Lebanon don't stop? Or do you think it's a bit more complex than that?
Iran will never, ever give up on Lebanon because the relationship is organic. Iran has three options now, and this is not from me, it's from different sources. First, to tell the Americans, let us return to war. Second, to tell the Americans, we close the Strait of Hormuz until you decide what you want to do with the Israelis to force them to stop. And third, let us open the Strait of Hormuz, stop the war between Iran and the United States, and Iran will join Hezbollah in bombing Israel, and let it be what will be. So these are the three options that Iran will put on the table in Islamabad. And it will be up to the Americans to decide. Either they will stop the war and ask Benjamin Netanyahu to stop, or they will regain the fight, or they will join Hezbollah and continue the war on Israel and separate the two fronts between Israel and America. What the Israelis did with the Americans now is they trying to separate Lebanon from Iran and not the other way around, because the Israelis tried to separate Lebanon from Iran, and the Iranians said, well, bad luck, there's not going to happen. Pezeshkian, the president, said, Iran and Lebanon are one. You stop the war on Iran, you stop it on Lebanon, or we go back to war. The speaker, Mohammad Ghalibaf, who used to be an IRGC commander, said exactly the same. He said, Lebanon, Iran are one. If you want us to negotiate on behalf of Iran or Lebanon or not, this is out of the question for us to give up on the society that stand behind the resistance, and we support the resistance all the way, and Iran will return to war if Lebanon is not included. So there are two chances, but Joseph Aoun came with another one. He said, I'm going to talk with the Israelis. You guys do whatever you want in Islamabad. Forget about me, and I am going to convince the Israelis to stop the war. And the Israelis are going to say to Joseph Aoun, okay, go and conduct a civil war. This is what Thomas Barak, the US envoy, said. We will support the army. We offer you our air force if you want, and we can give you any support that you want as long as you disarm Hezbollah. And of course, the Lebanese army cannot fight Hezbollah. So how this is going to unfold internally with a president who, deja vu in 1982, like Bashir Gemayel, who put his hand with the Israelis, was assassinated, and then the table was turned on the head of the Israelis, who ended up occupying the country for 18 years, but forced to leave unconditionally.
I mean, God, that's so well stated, and history just repeats. You're absolutely right. And then as you were speaking, Elijah, I'm just thinking, how crazy would it be if Joseph Aoun and Noef Salem, the prime minister, said to the Israelis, you know what, we'll join your war on Lebanon. We're happy to. You guys keep bombing, and we'll offer you soldiers on the ground. Which is kind of essentially what the Israelis are asking for, like you said. But I actually, while we still have you, your analysis is so on point, so important, and you also are such
Look,
an
I
amazing
was in
military analyst.
1982. Sorry, I was in
Yeah.
1982 standing behind the Israeli delegation in Khaldeh Hotel while they were signing a peace deal with Lebanon. I lived that era.
So you know how it looks in the aftermath, especially, and you have even more of the population now, I would argue, that's willing to fight to make sure that that exactly that outcome doesn't happen that you even had in 1982. I want to ask you for a battlefield assessment while I have you, in terms of what's happening in the South, because kind of lost in the mix of Israel terrorizing civilians across the country, especially in Beirut yesterday. There was no military gain from that. Actually, the fight of Beirut is not a front line. The South is a front line where the Israelis have invaded and have so far, their ambition is to occupy Lebanon up to the Litani River and to maybe even annex it. But so far, they're still, having fierce battles in places that are about 3 to 4 kilometers away from the border, like in Bint Jbeil. They seem to be struggling despite yesterday's massacres, and maybe that's why part of the reason why they committed yesterday's massacres. But what does this tell us about Israel's campaign to invade and occupy South Lebanon and about Hezbollah's performance? You can maybe give us your military assessment at the moment.
The world have seen Hezbollah in October 2024, thinking that Hezbollah has been completely decimated. This is what the Israelis claimed. And because Hezbollah did not respond for 15 months, giving the time for the Lebanese government to understand that diplomacy doesn't with war criminals and immoral army like the Israeli army, everybody thought that this silence is a sign of weakness. Nevertheless, Lebanon chose the right moment. I mean, the resistance in Lebanon chose the exact right moment to start attacking Israel by launching 6 missiles, the time when all the Israeli Air Force was engaged against Iran. This is why the Israelis did not dedicate and allocate enough military asset to bomb Lebanon like what happened yesterday after the ceasefire, because they thought, and they always been saying, that in 3 or 4 days Iran will fall, and then the Americans, including Thomas Barak, said we need to cut the head of the snake, thinking that once Iran falls, Hezbollah will fall. But then we have seen days where Hezbollah fired 400 missiles and drone. This is an organization that is ready to fight for at least during the period of Donald Trump. We're talking about 2 years on a specific rhythm. Today they fired, I think, 40 or 50 drones and missiles on the Israelis, and they still fighting in the south of Lebanon, the Israeli occupation forces. Hezbollah changed completely from centralized force to decentralized force, from Qasi army to the resistance. When Sheikh Naim Qasim told the new leadership, I want you to bring me back to 1982 guerrilla resistance, where we had exactly the same operation, where we were completely under the ground, blinding the enemy, and we don't need major forces in one area. We're talking about tens of thousands of Hezbollah forces still not engaged in a battle, but only very small, minor group of the geography engaging with the enemy in the south of Lebanon, and the special forces are coming in only by individual in some location, but not many. So the bulk of Hezbollah force is still there and can fight for years and years, well equipped and manufacturing missiles and drones on daily basis. We have seen how the Israelis are hitting the civilian, and that tells a lot militarily. They don't have military objectives to hit. They have commanders to kill. And even if they do, commanders are very replaceable and quickly changed with others who are waiting. But nonetheless, when they hit bridges, when they hit civilians, when they hit the heart of Beirut, because they can't see any military target. So just venting against the civilian to make sure that Hezbollah paid the price is no longer working. Hezbollah was afraid for its society to be displaced, and the Israelis displaced all the Shia from day one from the south of Lebanon, the suburb of Beirut, and the Bekaa Valley. Therefore, Hezbollah doesn't have anymore anything to fear for, and is fighting away from the civilians. People who are in Hezbollah did not see their beloved one since 40 days because they don't want to mix with their families, and they want to keep away because they are on a completely different front, not offering Netanyahu the possibility to do exactly what he did in Gaza by hitting internally displaced people and families of commanders. Even if Donald Trump yesterday came out and said, I have killed the family of the IRGC, the family of the Basij. And he, in 2024, killed the family of Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon, but not this time. This time he will start again, but Joseph Aoun saved him. So we have to see how far this is going to go, and how far the Lebanese president, how many concessions he can give, because the Israelis will eat him alive during the negotiation. He doesn't understand how clever are the Israeli who can interpret every single syllable in a completely different way. This is an amateur going through Zionists who are highly trained and experienced in playing on word and rejecting their engagement. And that is since 1940 to the Oslo Agreement 1992, 1995, to any agreement made even with Hamas after 7th October, 2 years after the 7th of October, between yellow line and red line and blue line. And we withdraw, but no lasting ceasefire, but not eternal ceasefire, and not a durable ceasefire, and every word has a different meaning. So really, he doesn't know what he's going to be faced with.
And by the way, I just want to throw in, before we wrap up, before we say bye to Elijah, I just want to throw in to what you're saying. This is a president, Joseph Aoun, who in the last 40 days of war has yet to address the country. Massacre after massacre, week after week, invasion, attempted occupation, the killing of families, the killing of over 250 people in Beirut yesterday, bombing residential buildings full of families. The president has yet to address the country. So anyway, sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
he did speak about the water, that he's incapable of providing water to a village.
Yeah,
well,
yes. Oh.
There you go. Great, strong words from the president of a country that's currently being occupied and bombarded by its southern neighbor. Elijah, your analysis and your insight is truly, I think, irreplaceable. Incredible. I think unmatched. Really, I encourage everyone who's watching right now to follow Elijah on Twitter. I refuse again to call it X. You can subscribe to his Substack, I'm pretty sure, where he's publishing a lot of this really, again, expert analysis and insight into what's happening on the ground with, again, incredible sources. So thank you so much, Elijah, for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you soon.
Well, thank you very much for having me and being so modest to give me credit I don't deserve.
No. Only credit where credit's due.
Thank you,
Thanks, Elijah.